Jesus has been facing increased hostility. Confrontations with the Jews, mainly the Pharisees, have been mounting, such that in the last chapter, the Jews picked up stones to stone him. His public ministry is coming to an end. Jesus left Jerusalem and went away with his disciples to the place where John the Baptist had been baptizing. But he's about to be called again to Judea, this time to people who love him. But what happens will result in a greater outcry for his death. Let's see what happens. I'm in John chapter 11, verse 1, reading from the New American Standard Version.
Now a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was the Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick.
John was the last to write his gospel, so he writes knowing that many already know of Mary and Martha. They're introduced in Luke chapter 10 when they welcomed Jesus into their home. Remember, Martha was the one busy with preparations while Mary sat at Jesus' feet listening to him. John also refers here to John chapter 12 when Mary anoints Jesus. Continuing verse 3.
So the sisters sent word to him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. But when Jesus heard this, he said, This sickness is not to end in death, but for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified by it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was sick, he then stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was.
In our human minds, we read this and think, well, if Jesus loved them, why didn't he get up and go right then? But Jesus knew the work he would do, and he knew God would be glorified all the more if he waited. Mary and Martha wouldn't understand at first, but his love would be evident once he got there. Continuing verse 7.
Then after this, he said to the disciples, Let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and are you going there again? Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him. This he said, and after that he said to them, Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go so that I may awaken him out of sleep. The disciples then said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover. Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he was speaking of literal sleep. So Jesus then said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. Therefore Thomas, who is called Didymus, said to his fellow disciples, Let us also go, so that we may die with him.
Remember in John chapter 7, the Jews wanted to kill Jesus, and his brothers said, Leave here and go into Judea, not at all showing concern for what might happen to him there. Here, the disciples are worried. They just saw the Jews pick up stones to stone him, and Jesus eluded them. Now he's going back? In John 9:4, Jesus said, We must work the works of him who sent me as long as it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. It's a similar refrain here. Jesus is saying he will be fine because it's still day. He still has work to do. And he tells them what that work is regarding Lazarus. But Thomas, who comes to be known as Doubting Thomas because he didn't believe Jesus was resurrected, shows some doubt here as well. He doubts Jesus can survive this particular trip, so he tells the other disciples, "Let us go so we can die with him." Continuing verse 17.
So when Jesus came, he found that he had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. Martha, therefore, when she heard that Jesus was coming, went to meet him, but Mary stayed at the house. Martha then said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live, even if he dies. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I have believed that you are the Christ, the Son of God, even he who comes into the world."
Martha has incredible faith. She believes that Jesus is the Son of God. She believes in Jesus' ability to heal. She says resolutely, "If you had been here, my brother would not have died." She even says, "Even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you." But the possibility of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead is not in her mind. She's clearly taken aback later in verse 39. Her focus is on Lazarus's eternal future. He will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. She clearly heard Jesus when he said, "He who believes in me will have eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day." She believes that. For the future, Jesus brings her back to the present, sharing with Martha his next I am statement. "I am the resurrection and the life." It's not just that he's able to resurrect the dead and give life. It's not just for the future. He's there now. He is resurrection and life. Jesus shares truth that every believer in him can stand on. He who believes in me will live even if he dies, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Martha hears this amazing truth and she's probably thinking, "He's trying to comfort me, reassure me that even though Lazarus's body is dead, his spirit is not." Okay. Continuing verse 28.
When she had said this, she went away and called Mary, her sister, saying secretly, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she got up quickly and was coming to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha met him. Then the Jews who were with her in the house and consoling her, when they saw that Mary got up quickly and went out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Therefore, when Mary came where Jesus was, she saw him and fell at his feet, saying to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died."
You can see the love that Mary has for Jesus. She finds out he's there and jumps up and goes to him, falling at his feet. She says the same thing her sister said. "Lord, if you had been here." He's her Lord. She has faith in him. But her faith is only so big. Her brother is dead. That's an insurmountable problem. The time for a miracle has passed. Continuing verse 33.
When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and was troubled, and said, Where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. So the Jews were saying, See how he loved him. But some of them said, Could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man also from dying?
A lot of different interpretations as to why Jesus had these emotions. We know that he loved Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. John tells us that in verse 5. And even in the message the sisters sent to him, they said, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. There's a special relationship here. And we know that Jesus has spent time with them. They've heard his teaching. They know who he is. They believe. So we have Mary at his feet weeping, deep sorrow and grief, and others with her also weeping. And it says Jesus is deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Troubled. And he weeps himself. He knows what he's going to do. He's about to raise Lazarus from the dead. So he's not weeping in the same way they're weeping. He's not weeping as if there's no hope. Maybe he's weeping because they're grieving as if there's no hope. Maybe he's troubled because the resurrection and the life is in their midst, and they're shaking their heads saying, If you had been here. Some of the mourners say he opened the eyes of the blind man, so couldn't he have kept this man from dying? Again, this is what deeply moves Jesus, this lack of faith. Verse 38.
So Jesus, again being deeply moved within, came to the tomb. Now it was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, Remove the stone. Martha, the sister of the deceased, said to him, Lord, by this time there will be a stench, for he has been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, Did I not say to you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they removed the stone. Then Jesus raised his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but because of the people standing around, I said it so that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. The man who had died came forth, bound hand and foot with wrappings, and his face was wrapped around with a cloth. Jesus said to them, Unbind him and let him go.
The exchange between Jesus and Martha is so amazing. Let's go back to their initial exchange. Remember, Martha's first words were, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Jesus tried to elevate her faith. He told her her brother would rise again. Even gave another powerful I am statement. To Martha alone, I am the resurrection and the life. And he told her what that meant. Remember, he asked, Do you believe this? She said, Yes, Lord, I have believed that you are the Christ, the Son of God. But now, at the tomb, she's perplexed. She's like, what are you doing? Why would you remove the stone? Okay, maybe you want to see his body and pay your respects, but it's not worth the stench. And Jesus says, Did I not say to you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? If you believe. Present tense. Martha said, I have believed. She believed in Jesus as her Lord. She believed in what he could have done if he'd only arrived earlier. She even believed in a future resurrection. But she had no present tense believe in what Jesus could do now. So Jesus looks to the Father and speaks aloud for the sole purpose that those hearing him may believe that the Father sent him. And the resurrection and the life astounds everyone with the miracle of raising Lazarus from the dead. We aren't told Mary and Martha's reaction, but can you just imagine? They already loved Jesus, already believed in him as the Christ, but their understanding of who he is. We can know he's God, yet still have to grow in our understanding of what that means. Jesus showed up and performed one of his greatest miracles, and it's beautiful, bringing someone he loved back to life. Continuing verse 45.
Therefore, many of the Jews who came to Mary and saw what he had done believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them the things which Jesus had done. Therefore, the chief priests and the Pharisees convened a council and were saying, "What are we doing? For this man is performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, all men will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." But one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all, nor do you take into account that it is expedient for you that one man die for the people, and that the whole nation not perish." Now he did not say this on his own initiative, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus was going to die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but in order that he might also gather together into one the children of God who are scattered abroad. So from that day on, they planned together to kill him.
This is what hardened hearts look like. Jesus resurrects a man, one of his greatest works to testify that he is God, and it leads to an emergency meeting where the religious leaders resolve once and for all to kill him. They're concerned about the Romans. If all the people come to believe in Jesus, they will look to Jesus as their king and maybe try to overthrow Roman rule. But the true motivation here is spiritual. They walk according to the prince of the power of the air, Satan. He's the one who wants to kill Jesus, thinking it will thwart Jesus' mission to save mankind. But God is sovereign. Caiaphas didn't even know that he was prophesying God's plan that Jesus would die, and it would result in countless souls who would be saved. Continuing verse 54.
Therefore, Jesus no longer continued to walk publicly among the Jews, but went away from there to the country near the wilderness, into a city called Ephraim, and there he stayed with the disciples. Now the Passover of the Jews was near, and many went up to Jerusalem out of the country before the Passover to purify themselves. So they were seeking for Jesus and were saying to one another as they stood in the temple, "What do you think, that he will not come to the feast at all?" Now the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that if anyone knew where he was to report it, so that they might seize him.
We can feel it mounting. The end of Jesus' earthly ministry is near. His crucifixion is near. The chief priests and the Pharisees are clinging to unbelief, and Jesus is keeping his distance until his time comes. But while the chief priests and Pharisees cling to unbelief, others are believing in him. It's why Jesus waited 2 more days before he went to Mary and Martha. He waited until Lazarus' body was starting to decompose. Waited until all the mourners had gathered, bereft of hope, and the light of the world appeared and demonstrated that he is the resurrection and the life. I want to return to his statement to Martha in verse 40. Did I not say to you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? Believing is not just for the moment of salvation. It should never be in the rearview mirror or pinned solely to an eternal future. It is present tense. Believe now for whatever the Lord is doing, however he is leading. Believing is how we see the glory of God. But the beauty is that if we doubt, we can see his glory even in this by asking, Lord, help my unbelief. He is faithful. He will answer. Right now, present tense, believe and cling.